Nailed it. How's it going, ladies and gents? We were not working for a moment there. Reasons that were probably not my fault, but now we are actually working. How's it going? So this stream, as the title implies, is not a let's make stuff together stream. It's a let's explain a concept stream. So as ever, this is going to be more like a podcast recording. So ask questions if you have questions. That's the whole point of doing them live rather than just being a podcast. And you know what? It might not even work as a podcast, but that doesn't matter as long as it works as a stream. So it's all good. White Matrix on YouTube. Hey, how's it going? Sprout911 on Twitch. How's it going? And not all of the chats are connecting, which is really great. Hi. Right, so we're talking about chord extensions, and we'll talk a little bit about triadic music theory in general. We'll get into inversions and sus chords a little bit. Captain Buddy 7 on Twitch. Thank you for salt. I think that's what it says. Yeah, salt. Nifty. I'm trying to think if I've missed something. No. But what I do need to do is do a kind of formal podcast intro. So that might be a little bit janky, but you'll deal with that because you're grown-ups. So I'll do the formal podcast bit now. Shall I write down the time? No, because I can't see the time, so that'll be a waste. I know exactly what I'm doing with my life. Put that in the bin. Nifty. So I'll do the awkward podcast intro and then we'll just get straight into it. And this is going to be edited a whole bunch. So it's all good. Questions are welcome, as always. Welcome back to the LTGuitarist Podcast. I'm your host, musician, and music educator Liam Taylor. Whole point of this podcast is that I talk about music and my experiences in music in the hope that it helps other people to earn a living off of music, just like I've done. You know, that was not the most coherent intro I've ever done, but it still ticked all the boxes as far as box ticking is concerned. Today we're talking about chord extensions, chord theory, and how chord theory applies to guitars. Why do guitar chords have to be different to piano chords and all that kind of stuff? So, I have a piano in front of me. I don't, but as far as the podcast is concerned, I have a piano in front of me. So what I'm going to do is write out all the notes from the C major scale. And yeah, it's just going to be C major because it's easiest. So let's go C. Oh, you know what? If you were able to hear the piano, I would consider that a bonus. I forgot to hit the idiot switch. Nailed it. Right. C major scale. I'm going to do a bar. I'm just going to put each note C, D, E, F, G, A, and B. We'll do the full octave just so we can see it. So C major scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and the octave C. So let's go back to not wanting to be mean, but baby's first chord theory. When we talk about chords, we are kind of talking about triadic chord theory, which is the dominant chord theory in Western music. Triadic just means threes. So chords are built by stacking threes on top of each other. So if we have this scale in front of us, C major, what we're going to do is we're going to take a note. So we'll take C to start with, and then we're going to add its third in the scale. So we're just going to go C, D, E. E is the third of C. So our first chord, our first two notes is going to be a C, followed by an E. And then what's a third on top of E? E, F, G. It's G. So our first chord is C, E, and G, which you might recognize as a C major. That is how a C major chord, that is how the tonic chord in C major is built. You just take the root note, C, and then you stack a third, and then stack a third on top of that. And then inside of C major, we can do that for every single chord. So if we stack, so if we take a D, and then we stack a third, if we take a D and we go up a third, we have D, E, F. So F is the next note we want. We're then going to go up another 3, F, G, A. And that gives us our second chord in C major, D minor. We're going to do the same thing again. We're going to go E. We're going to start with an E. Going to start with our E. And we're going to go up 3, E, F, G. And then 3 again, G, A, B. G, A, B. That gives us an E minor chord. And that is how you take a scale and turn it into chords. So I could sit here all day and do this for every single chord, but I think you get the idea. So you stack thirds within a scale and you get the C major chord, then the D minor chord, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, and B diminished. And all of those notes come from the C major scale. We're not going outside at all, and you can tell that because there's no accidentals, there's no sharps, no flats. So I've said major and minor. Let's cover that a little bit. That is to do with the chromatic distance between the first note and the first third that we stacked. So when I say chromatic, I mean outside of the scale. It kind of makes a little more sense to look at on guitar. It's over that way. And I don't have an amp. Don't have an amp ready, so you're just going to have to deal with it. But basically, if we go up in C, it's a little easier to see the distance between a major third and a minor third. So if we're on C here, this is going to work really well for the podcast. If we have a C here, the distance up to a major third, which, as we can see here, is E, is like that, but a minor third is actually a shorter distance. It's a C and an E flat, and it has a much sadder sound. So inside of a scale, all of the notes, all of the chords, excuse me, I'm going about this wrong. When we're diatonically building a set of chords within a scale, diatonically means sticking to the notes of the scale, we obviously can't go outside of the scale. But if we wanted to, we could take this E and make it an E flat, or a D sharp like it says on the screen, and right there now we have a C minor chord. Obviously has a very different sound to C major, but that would be called chromatic because it's taking a note, it's borrowing a note from another scale, or going outside of this particular scale that we're stuck to. Okay, so we have triads. This is all a triad is, 3 notes, and it's called Triadic music theory because we're stacking thirds. So what happens, I'm trying to think which the direction to go in is. You can take these notes and you can put them in a different order. So we've got the tonic, the root note, then we've got the third, and then we've got its fifth. So if you yes, we went C, stacked a third to get E, stacked another third to get G, but we refer to these notes in their relationship between the tonic of the chord, the root note of the chord. So in terms of C, we have C, the root note, E, the major third, and G, the fifth. If we then look at the next chord, D minor, we have D, the root note, F, the minor third, and A, the fifth. So these notes' relationship to each other is a third, but we refer to them as their relationship to the tonic, the root note. You don't have to play these notes in this order. We could, for example, put the third as the lowest note. So we're just going to take this E, that was a bit messy. So we've taken the E and the G and we've put them under the C, and now we have this. Still very nice. It's still a C major chord because we have those three notes, the C, E, and G, but they're in a different order. This is called an inversion, and this specifically is called first inversion. We can do something else. We can actually put it so the G is the lowest note. So lowest to highest, this goes G, C, E. Also very nice. We call that second inversion. Again, all the notes are C major, but it's first or second inversion. And it's confusing because first inversion is when you put the third as the lowest note. Second inversion is when you put the fifth as the lowest note. I know, it's a bit mad, but music kind of is a bit mad. So you don't necessarily have to have the 1, 3, and 5 in a chord. You can change, for example, the third to what we call a sus chord. And a sus chord is a triad, but you've replaced the 3 with a different note. So in this example, let's pull this over so you can see our scale. In the example of the C major chord in the key of C major, we can replace the third, which is E, with either an F or a D. If we replace the E with a D, if we replace the E with a D, we now have this chord. Which is nice. It's quite pensive. We don't quite know how to feel about it, and that's called a C sus 2. Or we can replace the E with an F chord, with an F note. And we have this chord, which is also quite pensive, but in a slightly different way. And if you look at the notes we have available, you can see that we actually only have a D or an F. Those are our only options. If we're going C, E, G, we can only really move the 3 up 1 or down 1. So that's what we can do. That's what sus chords are. So a sus chord, I tell students to mentally replace the word sus with replace the 3 with a, because you're either going to replace the 3 with a 2, D in this case, or you're going to replace the 3 with a 4, F in this case. So just to recap, we have C major, we have C sus 2, or we have C sus 4. Yeah. Sus chords are completely separate to major or minor, basically, because you don't have a third telling you whether the chord is happy or sad. You have a sus note instead, so you don't really know how to feel about it. You could, let's see, you could have, if you really wanted to, a sus sharp 2. Oh, that would just make it minor, wouldn't it? Never mind. You could have a sus flat 2 if you wanted. So C, D flat, and G. And And quite aside from sounding pretty horrible, that actually takes us outside of the scale. So that would be not diatonic. That would be a chromatic move there. You could also, I don't know, replace the E with a sharp 4. Ugh. So you got a C, an F sharp, and a G. And it sounds pretty horrid. So I'm just going to put that E back to where it was. You can do the same thing with the minor chords. You can do the same thing with any chord in the scale if you want. So if we take this E minor chord, E, G, and B, we can replace the 3 with a 2 to get E, F, B. Oh, that's not right. Excuse me. Hang on. No, that is. What am I on about? Yeah, F. Oh, is that flat? Hang on. Okay. I'm not going to do the example of E because that clearly sounds horrid. I'll get to why in a second. Let's take the example of D minor. So we've got D, F, and A. F is the third, the minor third in this case. So we can replace the minor third with an E and have this sound, which is rather nice but quite pensive. Or we could have a D, G, and A, which is also quite pleasant but quite pensive. So sus chords are really helpful if you want to have the tonality of a specific chord, but sometimes I find that playing major or minor makes too much of an emotional statement. Sometimes I feel like the third can feel quite crowded. For example, on guitar, if you play the low E chord, whether it's E minor or E major, I find that for some reason in the lower register there, having the third in there, I just don't really like. So in that example, I tend to do like a really big power chord instead of the major or minor. But another way around that would be sus chords. So you could just do power chords, roots and fifths, or you could do sus chords. Let's take a look at this E chord. E, G, and B. So you get something a little different here when you try to do a sus2 chord. We can do our sus4. We can replace the G with an A and get a very pleasant but slightly pensive E sus4. But what if we wanted to replace the G here, the minor 3, with a 2? So normally what we'd do is we'd just put it down a single pitch. Yeah, just check that with the other one. Yeah, it is only one. So a minor note becomes a 3. Let me play that. Now an E sus2 is very pleasant sounding, but you'll notice that this middle note, the 2 that we've sussed, is actually a sharp. And we don't have F sharp in C major. It doesn't exist. So what we should really have is an E sus flat 2. I'm going to put it there. So E, F, and B. And that sounds pretty janky because the closeness of the root note, the E, and the flat 2, the F. So this doesn't come up an awful lot. We don't really think about if we're just throwing around sus chords, we tend not to worry about whether those notes are actually in the scale, because, I mean, you tell me which sounds better, with the flat 2 or with the chromatic F sharp. I think it's pretty clear that the chromatic F sharp sounds better, but it does take us outside of the scale. Just going to refresh Twitch on this screen because it's slightly broken. Everything's breaking today. It's really good. Amazing. So we've talked about inversions, we've talked about chromatic and diatonic, we've talked about sus chords. What other kind of chords are there? I'm going to open up chordfind.com, my old friend, and the possibly the greatest single guitar resource on the internet. This is just a reminder of what chords there are, and we're not going to directly talk about all of these chords, but we are basically going to talk about these chords. So it's worth saying at this point that sometimes chord theory, as it applies to music theory, so composition in general, or the piano, doesn't work with guitar, just because of the way guitars are tuned. Sometimes things aren't going to work. One example of this is inversions. If you're playing, for example, the familiar old open chord pans, it's sometimes quite tricky to work out how to voice inversions, and it's a little more advanced. It's not quite as straightforward as piano, where you just put one finger below the other fingers. I mean, for example, on guitar, if you're playing something where the root is on the E string, you don't have a note lower than that. Not really. So what we have for guitar instead, well, not instead. What's a better way to phrase that? I suppose we could approach this from the angle of how would you write an inversion. You could write C first inversion. What you're more likely to do, especially for guitar, is write a slash chord. So you can see on chordfind.com you've got C/E. Now, you or me probably know that C/E is the first inversion of C, because it's the major third, right? And you're putting the major third in the base of the chord below the tonic, but you've got to write that as a /E. I find that that's kind of the easier way to write it, because you don't worry too much about, I don't know, if you say to a guitarist, do a first inversion, they're going to go, I don't know what you're on about, so just say C/E. It just seems to be easier. So yeah, that's all we really want to say about slash chords. If you're completely unfamiliar with slash chords, you've got the actual chord name on the left hand side here, so in this case E, and then on the right hand side is, on the left hand side you've got the chord name C, so that would just be a C major chord as you play it any other day of the week. On the right hand side of the slash you've got an E. E is the note that you are adding to the base of the chord. So you start with the normal C chord and you add an E. Likewise, let's look for another one, A/E. You play the A chord exactly how you would at any other point, but you add the E in the bass under the chord. Cool. We haven't spoken about diminished chords, so let's do that. So when we were stacking thirds earlier, what I'm going to do actually is copy the scale. I'm going to put it there, and I'm going to change the velocity so it's a different color, because I'm very smart. So when we're stacking thirds, you either get a major or a minor chord, yeah? Sort of. Let me make some space as well. When stacking and trying to make a chord based on the 7th degree of the scale, the B, we run into a bit of trouble. Let me show you. So let's take our B. Let's go up a third, B, C, D. Amazing. And then D, E, F. Cool. This is going to sound great because it's diatonic. Ooh, not quite. What we have here is a minor chord, but specifically a diminished chord. A diminished chord is I was working out an analogy in my head and then it didn't work. So what we have here is, I guess, the ugly duckling of minor chords. That was better than the other one I had in my head. So we've got our B, we've got our tonic here, we've got a minor third, a little bit miserable, but actually we can deal with a minor third. But what we have here is a flat 3. Excuse me, what we have here, the F, is a flat 5. So every other minor chord would have a regular fifth, a perfect fifth. A perfect fifth in this case is an F sharp. So if we go B, D, F sharp, we have just a normal run-of-the-mill minor chord, but that's not diatonic to C major. If we're being strictly diatonic, it would have to be an F, which gives us this diminished chord. So a diminished chord is a root, a minor 3, and a flat 5. Okay? So that's a diminished chord. An augmented chord is the other way. So an augmented chord is a major one. Let's stick with B for the moment. So let's take a B major chord. Lovely. B, D sharp, and F sharp. An augmented chord would take the 5 and raise it a semitone. So we'd have B, D sharp, and G, which sounds kind of crazy and weird in the same way that a diminished chord does, but sort of the opposite. If a diminished chord is scary because of its darkness, the augmented chord is scary because of its openness. So in my mind, a diminished chord is being locked in a cupboard, whilst the augmented chord is being catapulted through the sky. You've got very dark and too open. So that's diminished and augmented. Let's go back here. Major, minor, tick, tick. Diminished, augmented, tick, tick. Sus, tick. 6 and 7. And we've also got add chords. I think a 6 is basically an add chord. So let's talk about add chords. Let's start with... Let's start with 6. So 6 is very straightforward. You take a chord, let's say, oh, I don't know, C major, and you add a 6th to it. So we can count up the scale: C, D, E, F, G, A. So a 6th chord, a C6, is this. Oh, quite nice, isn't it? A little bit crowded, maybe, but that is what a 6th chord sounds like. So we've got C, E, G, and A. Now, a 6th chord isn't built through stacking thirds, because if it was, we'd have a B instead of an A, which is a 7th chord. We'll get to that later. Instead, it's just a triad, and we're adding a 6th. So it doesn't really fit with the whole stacking thirds thing, but it still makes quite a nice chord. Yeah? So that's all a 6th chord is. Now, something I learned quite recently, because I tend not to use 6th chords or minor 6th chords because they don't make a damn bit of sense. A 6th chord, as I've just explained, is a major chord where you add a major 6th. A minor 6th would imply a minor chord with a minor 6th, but it's actually a major chord with a minor 6th. And I got thinking about that, and I remember, this sounds very familiar. This sounds like 5 years ago I learned this and decided to never touch a 6th chord because that doesn't make any sense. The way that we describe chords is not perfect. We haven't sussed it out yet. In fact, chord names are kind of just a guide to describe what type of notes we're using. So it's not a perfect system. It's basically a perfect system up until where I explained today. So major, minor, diminished, augmented, sus, everyone agrees on those. In fact, we're going to talk about 7th chords as well. Everyone agrees on those as well. When it gets into 6th chords, it's a little more confusing because the system doesn't work. So don't worry about it. This is why we tend to have a score with the notes written out, or a tab with the notes written out, and then chord names above them. so that if there is any ambiguity, if I'm playing and I think a minor sixth is something different to the other person who thinks they know what a minor sixth is, we have the score to basically say whatever it is in this situation. Also, it's only one type of chord, which doesn't get used all that often, possibly because it doesn't make any sense. Maybe there's a really stupid system behind it, who knows. So that was me complaining about sixth chords. Let's talk about seventh chords. Let's put this sixth in the bin. So, C major triad, C, E and G. Ah, lovely. Made from stacking thirds. We went C, D, E is our major third, so we'll have that. Then we went E, F, G is the fifth, so we'll have that. What happens if you continue stacking notes? Let's go G, A, B. Ooh, what does this sound like? Pretty nice. We call that a major 7 chord. We call it that because we have a major 3 and a major 7. Yeah, that's all you really need to understand about that. There are, in the natural minor scale or the major scale, there are 4 kinds of 7th chord. There are 3 kinds of triad, major, minor, diminished. There are 4 kinds of 7th chord. We have the major 7, like this. Let's do D minor, so we go D, and we already know the triad is D, F, and A. So what happens if we add a 3, if we stack a third on top of that fifth? We go A, B, C. So our minor 7 chord is D, F, A, C. One of my favourite kinds of chords. Lovely, lovely sound to that one. So it's called a minor 7 because we have a minor third and a minor 7. Yeah? Pretty straightforward. So what happens if we want to build a chord off of, I don't know, maybe G? So it's going to be a major chord. We've got G, then we go G, A, B is the major third, B, C, D is the fifth, and then D, E, F. Ooh, something's a little different here. It's got a little bit more spice to it than we thought. If it was, well, we've got a major 3 here, the B. If it was a major 7 chord, it would sound like this. But that F sharp doesn't belong in C major. It's a sharp. We don't have accidentals in C major. So what we have instead is both a major and a minor chord simultaneously. We have the root note G, we have the major third B, we have the perfect fifth D, but then we have a minor 7 F. So we call that a dominant 7 chord, and it's written as just 7. So in this case, G7. D minor 7 is written D lowercase m 7. C major 7 is either written C a little triangle 7, because triangle means major, or we'd go C large M, capital M 7. I think we go triangle because lowercase m and uppercase m are kind of hard to discern when you're trying to speed read. The fourth kind of 7 we have is a diminished 7 or a half diminished chord. You can write it as D-I-M. Oh no, it's not diminished 7, is it? It's half diminished, so it would be lowercase m 7 flat 5, minor 7 flat 5, or half diminished. You could also do a circle with a line through it. Diminished 7. So the diminished 7 chord is, we start on B. B is our root note, and then we go B, C, D for the minor 3, D, E, F for the flat 5, F, G, A. Ooh, excuse me. F, G, A for the, what's it called? Minor 7. Am I still streaming? I think I'm still streaming. My internet appears to be struggling these days. No, we're good. Okay. Where was I? So we have the B, the root, minor third, D, flat fifth, F, and minor 7, A, giving you a minor 7 flat 5, or a half diminished chord. Now, I don't know about you, but you get rid of that A, and you have the diminished triad by itself. It sounds pretty horrible. I actually prefer the sound of the minor 7 flat 5 to the diminished triad. Maybe that's just me. You can get an augmented 7 chord. I'm just going to check the... Oh, it doesn't appear to be on here. That's really helpful. Thank you, Chord Find. I no longer love you. So let's just, for the sake of it, let's go do an augmented 7. So we'll take a... Excuse me. So we've got a C major with a major 7, so C major 7. If we raise the 5th to be a G sharp, I'm reasonably certain that's an augmented 7. But if it's wrong, wasn't me, you know. Chords are stupid. Let's go a little bit further. Okay, so what happens if... I'm going to get rid of all of these. What happens if we want to keep stacking thirds? Well, we can do that. So if we have C, E, G, B, so a C major 7, we can keep stacking a third on top of that B. We go B, C, D. Now, well, first of all, let's listen to it. Quite nice. We're getting into jazz territory here, if we weren't already with the 7th chords. I mean, Whitesnake use 7th chords, so they can't possibly be jazz. That's just my pet theory. So, what note have we just added? We've added D. We have D in this scale. D is the 2. You'd think we might call this a 2 chord of some kind. We actually call it a 9. This is C major 9. Now, why in heck do we call it a 9 and not a 2? We call it a 9 because we achieve this chord by stacking thirds. So when we say 9, we're implying that there is already a 7 there. So you don't need to imply the existence of a triad. That's for granted in chord theory all the time, more or less, unless very obviously stated. When you say when you say major 9, you're saying we already have a major 7 note, but we're adding this 2 on top of it as well. Does that make sense? So we're going upwards. Let's say we didn't have the 7 in there. So it was a major triad, the C, E, and G, but then we just added a D on top of it for fun. A very nice sounding chord, not quite as spicy as the full one. If we get rid of that B and we just have the 2, we would call that an add 9 rather than a 9. Yeah? So we would take C to mean C major, add 9 means you literally just take that one note, the D in this case, and you add it on top of this triad. When you say major 9 instead of add 9, you're implying the existence of the 7 as well. Let's keep stacking notes. Let's go up another third, D, E, F. So now we have C, E, G, B, D, F. Pretty nice, getting kind of spicy, but because the notes are spaced out nicely, it's not crowded, it's not becoming a problem. What we have now is an 11 chord, C major 11. And again, you can do an add 11, so you have the triad, the C major triad plus an F is add 11. But if you have just a C major 11, you imply the existence of both the 7 and the 9. You dig? Let's go further. Let's stack a third on top of that F. F, G, A. Lovely. So now we have C, E, G, B, D, F, A. Sounds like this. We call that a major 13 chord. 13 refers to the A in this example, so the 6th degree of the scale, but because we're saying major 13, we imply the existence of not just the 13, but also the 11, the 9, and the 7. If you wanted an add 13 chord, well, it would just be a 6th chord, wouldn't it? Except in this example, that A is up an octave. So the 6th is just the 13, but it's up the octave and it has all the other notes in between it. Can we go even further? No, we can't, because if we try to stack a third on top of the 13, we go A, B, C, back to our tonic, and then we just repeat forever. I mean, we can, it's nice. Having multiples of the root note helps enforce the root notiness of the chord, so having more C's makes it sound like more of a C chord, so it's a little richer compared to... There's barely any difference there because we've got 7 notes. 4, 5, 6, 7. Yep, 7 notes. Gonna take a drink because I've been talking solidly for however long it is. Nope, there's no clock over there. I would absolutely take a sponsorship from Pepsi if they're offering. Just saying. Just saying. Okay. Jolly good. Where do we go from here? So there's all sorts of funny looking chords in the world that mean all sorts of different things, but now that we understand the basics as I've laid them out, it's pretty easy to work out what the different weird janky chords are. So for example, if we had a sharp 13 chord, it would probably be the case that we have a normal 13 chord. Sorry, let's say major 13 for simplicity's sake, because that's what we've got in front of us. If we had a major sharp 13, it's probably just going to be the case that we've taken this A and we've sharpened it. Yeah? So this is a C major sharp 13. I mean, let's hold that for a little bit longer. Yeah, it's a bit spicier. What else could we do? Let's say C major 13. Oh, I don't know. Let's take the 11 and flatten it. Because that's an E, so that's diatonic. So let's go sharp 11. So C major 13, sharp 11. We've got a C major 13 chord, but we've sharpened the 11, which was an F. It's now an F sharp. And I'm going to make that a bit longer because the more notes you have in a chord, the harder it is to discern an individual janky one. But if you kind of sit on it, you can hear that one stand out a little bit. Yeah, it's quite nice. Let's do another one. Okay. We couldn't really do a flat 11, could we? Because that would just be E. We already have an E in this chord. So, well, it's tricky, isn't it? Because that would still basically be a 13 chord. Because when you say major 13, you're implying the existence of the 11, 9, and 7. But if one of those doesn't happen to be there, are we really going to notice? So this is a version of the major 13 where instead of the 11, we have another major third. fine. And this is the original version of the chord with the 11 rather than that second major third. There's not really any difference, is there? Let's try it again. Versus... I mean, there is a difference, but like, if you played them next to each other and told me one was the other, I wouldn't be able to argue with you, frankly. And that's an interesting point to move into guitar. Because I don't know about you, but most guitars don't have the capability of playing this many notes. Not at one time, anyway. I mean, my 8-string could, but you probably are trying to play these chords on not an 8-string. So what happens when you want to play a 13 chord, or for that matter an 11 chord? You could do an 11, but it would be really confusing. What happens when you want to do those on guitar? Well, actually, the voicings we use on guitar are different to how you would play these on piano. For piano, it's quite easy because you just stack one chord on top of another. It's quite straightforward, which is why you have you tend to get weirder chords from pianists than you do guitarists, because the piano is just made for triadic music theory jankiness. It's my pet theory anyway. In guitar, you've basically got to pick and choose what you think the most important notes are from the chord extension. So let's take the example of a 9th chord. So a 9th chord would usually be, let's take the example of, I think, G9. Yeah, so a 9 chord is G with a B and a D, so that's your major triad. Dominant 7 plus an A is a 9. So you've got a, what kind of... It's a dominant 7 with a 2. Yeah? So G, B makes it major, D makes it a 5th. So then minor 7, but with a 2 on top as well. So dominant 7 with a 2. Now on guitar, there's actually a voicing of this that has 4 notes. It's a very pleasant chord as well. So we would play this. Could have plugged this in, but I didn't. So the voicing... Oh, that's not even it. My bad. There it is. So the voicing is on the middle 4 strings. So on the A string, you're playing 10th fret. On the D string, you're playing 8th. And on the G and B strings, you're playing 10th fret as well. So you're thinking, that's only 4 notes. You can very clearly see there are 5 notes here. Well, let's work out what those notes are. We've got our G. We've got our G, our root note. The next note up here on the D string is... What's that? A minor 3. Oh, hang on, that's a minor 3. I'm playing the wrong voicing. Not even the wrong voicing, the wrong chord. Let's try that again, shall we? A G9 is only 4 notes on a guitar. It's the middle 4 strings. The A string, you're going to play 10th fret. The D string, you're going to play 9th fret. And then the G and B strings, you're going to play 10th fret. So you have this. And I know what you're thinking. That's 4 notes. But on here, we have 5 notes. Very clearly. So what's the difference? Let's take a look at the guitar. We've got our G. We've got our G on the A string there. The next note up, that's our major 3. And then what's this next note? Well, that's a 7. So we've got the root major 3 minor 7. And then we've got the 9 at the top, the 2. So we actually are not bothering to play a 5th in this example. So why have we opted to take the 5th out? Well, because we like our guitar chords possible to play. Is basically the reason. Whatever way you tune an instrument, you're going to have some things that are really easy to do and some things that are basically impossible to do or just quite tricky. So for guitar, we've decided actually let's not bother playing the fifth in this chord, because the job of the fifth in chord theory is to add weight to the tonic, the root note of the chord. And that's basically down to maths, frequencies, algorithms, maths, and all sorts of numbers and stuff. So a note sounds fine by itself, but you add its fifth and you're just adding structural integrity to the chord. So when you have a chord like the 9, the dominant 9 chord, you don't really need the structural integrity because you need the special notes to come out. You need the 3 to tell you whether it's happy or sad, and you need the 7 and the 9 because those are the notes that are really giving character to the chord. So let's take the voicing on piano as we had it before. Now let's do what guitarists do and not play the fifth. Now we have this. And you barely notice that note is gone. That's with. Oops, and this is without. I mean, let's take a C major, let's take a G major by itself. What if we get rid of the fifth now? Now it sounds weak, it sounds flimsy, it sounds okay, it sounds basically upbeat, but there's no substance to it. You need that fifth there to really give it integrity, to really strengthen it. But you don't if you're using chord extensions. I feel like that covers almost everything. Let's take a look at chordfind.com to see what we've missed out on. So major and minor, tick. I would absolutely tick. Ooh, excuse me, that's my own voice for some reason. Where's that coming from? Not important. Excuse me, so major and minor we're happy with. Did that ages ago. Diminished and augmented we covered. Sus we covered. 6 we covered. 7, major 7, minor 7 we covered. 11 and 13 we covered. So with all the, I mean, if you look at chordfind.com, there's lots of other different chords in there. Everything you need to know about chords we have covered. We've even gone a little bit extra in places. Everything else you need to know, everything you need to know has been covered. You have the tools to work out whatever you might need to work out. So for example, there's a 6 add 9 chord here. Well, you know what a 6th chord is, and you know what add 9 means. So you just do that. It's that simple. What else have we got? 7 sus 4. So it's a 7 chord, a dominant 7 chord, but rather than having, so it's a 7 chord, but we're not going to play a major or minor third. So actually the tonality of it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's a major 7 or a minor 7, and therefore a major 7 chord. Excuse me, I'm getting my numbers mixed up. So we've got a 7 sus 4 chord here. And because it's a sus 4 chord, it doesn't matter if we refer to it as a major 7 or a dominant 7, because there's no 3 telling us that. So we take a normal triad, major or minor, replace the 3 with a sus 4, and then you add the major 7 note to the top. Easy. Ooh, 7 major 5. What are you? That's intriguing. Okay, so that looks like a 7 chord, I think, with an augmented 5. So I don't know why it's called a major 5, because that doesn't make any sense. So this is one of those things where it's like 6th chords, minor 6th chords. Doesn't make any sense. Don't worry about it. There are no right answers because music is in a constant state of flux. This is going to be like my final wrapping up point. Hang on, let me send this message. Music is in a constant state of flux. Music has always been in a constant state of flux. Whenever a new instrument is developed or a new idea is developed, people have to change how they think about music and what words we use to describe it. Music theory is essentially the study of the language that we use to describe how music is written. And you can get very pedantic and very specific about it, but what's important is that really you're able to communicate what you want from a piece of music with the people who are going to play it. Doesn't matter a hoot what the audience thinks, not one bit, because their enjoyment of something isn't going to have anything to do with what specific voices you used. They're just going to like it based on whether or not it sounds good. Yeah? So you only need music to communicate with the people playing your music. If someone gets really into your music such that they want to play it themselves, that's fine. That's a different relationship you have with that person. It's only when you're describing your music to people playing it that it matters what language you use. And actually, if I'm writing down a minor 6th chord, I'm going to say what aspects of that chord I want someone to play. And then the next time they come to it, they're going to know what I mean by saying minor 6th, because I'm paying them to know, okay? And it doesn't matter what future music archaeologists think, whether they think I did it wrong or whether they think I'm a trendsetter, doesn't matter, because today, in 2020, I am able to communicate what I want from people playing my music. So there will be people telling you that whatever you write a chord as, there will be someone that tells you it's wrong, because there are so many different schools of thought on music and music theory, because music has developed in lots of cultures over the world for many, many years, and it's only sort of comparatively recently that we've all tried to make music together. So we occasionally run into language problems where we describe one thing as something else, but then it takes a little bit of explanation and we all know what to do the next time. So don't worry about writing down a chord wrong, but just remember that a chord name is only an approximation of what that chord should be. Is there going to be an 11th degree of the scale in that 13th chord? Well, maybe not, but does it really matter? No, it doesn't, because the 13th matters, because it's the one at the top. Yes. I suppose we could talk a little bit about how and when you would use different chords like this. I mean, it sort of is up to you. If you play a 13 chord and you really like the sound of it and you find that you want that to be the basis from which you write an entire piece of music, then you do that. In which case, that's the appropriate way to use the 13th chord. Yeah, I mean, there are way more complex ways of thinking about it, but I think that's all you really need to know. I used for a long time the, 7, 9, 11, and 11 voicing, because I just liked the sound of two triads stacked on top of each other. So you played one chord in the left hand and a different chord in the right hand, and I liked how it sounded nice, but I treated it in my head as two different chords. And I thought that worked really well. It can be helpful to write chords in this way if you're trying to add a melody into your chords. But usually if you're playing in an ensemble, you don't need to do that because you have other people playing those melody notes. I mean, you could sort of get into the realms of leading notes and kind of how in jazz and classical music, a fifth is supposed to make you want to play the root chord, and the second, I'm losing the power to speak. So when we talk about chords, the fifth chord, so in this case G, is supposed to point to the home chord, the C, and the 2 chord, D minor, is supposed to point to the 5, which is why 2-5-1 is a really common chord progression in jazz, the D minor, G, C. And that's something that you can kind of use to inform how you write. I find that especially when writing in jazz, you can use those ideas to set up something and then you subvert it. So for example, you can have a 2-5-1 where you swap the 5, you do what's called a tritone substitution. So rather than playing, in this case, a G, you would play a D flat 7. And that's called a tritone substitution, where you just take the 5 and you swap it for a note, the tritone away, the diminished 5 away. So in this case, D flat. And that's one way that you can kind of set up an expectation and then subvert it. I'm going to have to stop talking because my brain has stopped working. But I feel like we've covered an awful lot of chord theory. I hope to God that when I wake up tomorrow, there's enough here to actually edit together a podcast. Otherwise, we've just had a fun time talking about theory, which is also allowed. So thank you for hanging out on Twitch, Periscope, Mixer, and YouTube. Thanks for listening if you're listening to the podcast on Spotify and wherever else you go to get your podcasts. Sprout 911, super fun chord theory time. Probably going to be the name of the podcast, not going to lie. I have a new single coming out on Friday. It's called Put It Over There, Nerd. Put It Over There is one word, comma, nerd, a different word. It's kind of fun, kind of funky, kind of weird, kind of a little bit chiptune-y. That's going out on Spotify and all major distribution platforms. If you are signed up to my mailing list, you get to hear it tomorrow because I'm nice. But it goes out publicly on Friday the 8th. Is there a mailing list link? There is. If you're on Twitch, you can scroll down and press the mailing list button because I've worked this stuff out in advance. And honestly, I can't remember where else it is on the other platforms. You're just going to have to look for it, aren't you? Or go to Twitch and find it there. Yeah, that truly is everything. Thanks for hanging out. And I will see you Wednesday evening for whatever I'm streaming Wednesday evening. Toodaloo.